and also, they're right. These podiums are really high for us short people. All right. Okay, good afternoon. We're about to get started. You can silence your cell phones. There is going to be some background noise because it appears they're packing up a lot from the expo. But we have the pleasure of hearing a talk, Being Autistic in a Neurotypical World While Working in the Lands of EHS and Risk, by Jonathan Klain out of Arizona State and currently editor for the Lab Manager magazine. He will explain his background and please be attentive to his talk.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Tanya. I hope everyone can hear me. I'm very excited to be here. Thanks for coming. So I'm going to do this as partly first-person narrative and partly talking about commonalities. But if you should know this saying. I'm going to do a bunch of sayings and quotes and things like that. If you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person, right? So I'm not going to generalize. Hey, all right. And I won't do any cliches like I'm preaching to the choir, because everyone's going to be like, where's the choir? I don't see a choir, John. Hey, that was great. See, we can communicate. I got it. All right, here we go. How many, I don't think many, any of you were when you were at the storytelling symposium and heard this? Oh, and like no one. That's great. Good. So there I was in Big Lots discount department store looking at a can of sardines, trying to decide if I was going to buy it. And I heard off to my side, excuse me, and I guess I'll turn this way. Most of you are this way. And I turned and I was like, yes? And there is a very pretty younger woman face to face. I'm like, yes? She says, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm like, no, it's fine. What is it? And she said, well, I'm interested in having a banana bread, and I was hoping to maybe they have a mix. I don't know if they have a mix, and I was hoping maybe you could help me find it. And I'm like, sure. Yeah, I can do that. That sounds easy. So I led her on a quest for the elusive box of banana bread mix. Wasn't much of a quest. 2 aisles over, I located it. I was so happy. I did exactly what she said. I grabbed the box, big smile on my face, handed her the box. There you go, enjoy your banana bread. She said thanks, and she was gonna keep talking, I'm convinced, but I did what she asked, and bang, I was back to the sardines, right? You can see where this is going, right? And so I'm back looking at my sardines, and I hear now a familiar voice. Excuse me. And I look, and there she is again. I'm like, this is curious, right? She still has the box in her hand. Why is it in her hand, not in the basket? And I'm like, yes. And she says, I'm so sorry to interrupt. I'm like, no, it's fine. What is it? And she said, well, I'm kind of embarrassed to say, but I don't really know how to make banana bread mix, and I was really hoping that you could help me with that. And did you get that? Right? And I was like, oh my goodness, thinking in my head, oh my goodness, John, oh my goodness, how could you not see this? Isn't it obvious? Who doesn't know how to make banana bread mix? And the instructions, they're right there on the back of the box. She must be intellectually challenged. So I gently take the box from her hands, because, you know, I grew up with some kids who were intellectually challenged, and I really want to be supportive of that community. And so I'm like, you can do this. I'm a terrible baker. I'm sure you can do this. If I can do it, you can do it. And I turned the box over to the back, and I showed her that the instructions are on the back of the box, and I read her the instructions word for word, right? She was so polite to listen. And then I handed it back and I said, you can do this, you can do this. And she gave me what I now call that look. You know, confusion, uncertainty. What's this guy doing? Is he joking? Is he kidding? Is he being sarcastic? Is he, oh, I don't know, flirting or something like that? Can't be that, right? And so I left with the sardines, she left with a box of confusion, I'm sure, right? And so I get to work on Monday, and the also young woman with whom I worked at the time, we would always talk, and she said, anything interesting happen over the weekend? And I'm like, yeah. And I told her the story. And when I finished, she's like, oh my God, John, she was flirting with you. And I'm like, no, she wasn't. And she said, John, I'm a younger woman. It's what I would have said. And I said, really? And she said, John, what do you expect? That she's going to say, hi, I find you attractive and I'd like to go on a date with you. And I said, well, at least it would have been clear, right? I would have known, right? She's like, oh my God, your ex is so right. You are the most clueless man on the planet. And I said, is there an award for that? And apparently, based on the expression on her face, yeah, there's no award for that. So anyway, now you know a little bit about me and about my autism and all of that. We all have challenges in life. You know one of mine. So here are my goals for what we're going to do today. So I want to increase understanding and absolutely empathy. Is anyone familiar with the double empathy problem when it comes to autism? So the double empathy problem is not that autistics are the only ones who can't empathize, and that, oh, by the way, I'm going to drop not so subtle clues along the way. See if you can keep track of the clues and figure out my one big thing, okay? So empathy as a construct that autistics don't get is a myth. Myth? Yes? It's a clue. More to come. So the double empathy problem is actually that it goes in both directions. I want to normalize and destigmatize just talking about autism. So a couple of times at two different places of employment of mine in my past, I was engaging with someone who was struggling quite a bit. And I was trying to help. I really wanted to help them do better. And so I had to have a chat with their leadership to try to be encouraging. And I said, you know, maybe this person is autistic, right? Meaning maybe there's something we can do to help, right? Do you know what, by these wonderful leaders, their reactions, two different institutions, different people, this was their reactions. No, we can't talk about autism. We can't talk about that. And I just thought, okay, this is nuts. I have no idea why that would be the case, right? Like if someone's got a broken leg, maybe they've got a broken leg and they can't get up the stairs. Maybe we should talk about that. No, we can't talk about broken legs, right? So anyway. More collaboration, more effectiveness, I'm very big about those. Relationships, create relationships, I'm very big on that. And then answer your questions. Okay, I was going to go as we go, but I'll take questions at the end. So let's just talk about terminology. A lot of this is very easy if you're unfamiliar with it, and if you're familiar, it'll be very, very easy, right? So there's autistic and then allistic. Allistic is just a shortcut. It means everyone else, and that's a clue, everyone else. That's really obscure. Anyway, so you're either autistic, like me, or you're allistic, everyone else. It's like you're either Jewish, like me, or you're Gentile, everyone else. See, now you know even more about me, and that's something that we tend to do as autistics. It's like, why? Is there a social norm that I'm violating? I really don't understand those at all, right? Okay. I am autistic. That's all I say. I'm autistic. This is me. I don't say I have autism. I have a cold. I have COVID. I have a headache. No, I'm autistic, right? I don't say, also I don't say, and whatever you want to say, say. I'm not telling you what to say, what not to say. I'm just telling you my view of it, which is shared by a bunch of other people. I don't say I'm with autism, because to me, the literal thing, it's like, hi, I'm John, and I'm with autism right here. See, this is me and my autism. I don't say that. On the spectrum, I think that's helpful, because when I tell people, they're like, but you don't seem autistic, John. I mean, not everyone says that. Some say, yeah, I totally knew it, and I was waiting for you to tell me. And that's always like so cool, right? Like the person is always the last one to know, right? And so on the spectrum can be really helpful for people to understand the construct. Autism spectrum disorder. Did you like that? Did I emphasize it enough? I don't really calibrate well. So it is called a disorder. I don't believe it's a disorder. I believe that it is merely a very different way for my brain to be wired and how I think. Not just what I think, but how I think. Thank you. I appreciate that. Throw money, too. That would be wonderful. Thanks. Asperger's, that's fine. It's an older diagnosis. It was removed in 2013 as a separate diagnosis from the APA, American Psychological Association's Diagnostic Statistical Manual, or DSM-5. So I don't call myself as having Asperger's, But if someone else does, totally fine. I was only diagnosed 2 years ago. Okay, I'm 62. I don't mind saying that. So, and if you're saying, wow, you don't look 62, thank you so much. I never get tired of that. Absolutely, right? So, I went through life 60 years without knowing, yet this explains almost everything in my life. High and low functioning, you hear that a lot. High and low functioning in what? You might say, hey, John, I know you. You seem pretty high functioning. Okay, in certain things, clearly in social norms and recognizing flirting when it's incredibly obvious, low functioning. So instead we say needs support. John's a guy that if he's going out and he's trying to meet women, he needs support. I need like a wingman and a wing woman, I'm pretty sure, both at the same time. Okay. Neurotypical versus neuroatypical, right? This is sort of, most people are neurotypical, and then autistics, ADHD, Tourette's, PTSD, dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, all neuroatypical, right? Not A means just not. Neurodivergent or neurodiverse, right? That's just numbers. One person, me, I am neurodivergent. A bunch of us together, we are neurodiverse. And I'm guessing by some of the applause and yay and thanks and representation that this group is, yay, neurodiverse, right? Awesome, I love it, yeah. This is fun, this is a lot of fun. We should do this again tomorrow, definitely. Repetition, right? Predictability, right? All right, cool. I know what he's gonna say, but I want to attend again because, I know what I'm getting. Then there's disability versus differability, right? And so I think it's good that autism and other neurodiversities are considered disabilities under the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's important. We need protection. I have been discriminated against several times, et cetera. And so that's important, but I don't really consider it a disability. It is a differability. So let's see. When I was going for my master's and I was meeting with the two faculty members to be interviewed, one of them, Mike Brady, ended up being my advisor at University of Southern Maine. My master's is in adult education. He said, hey, John, nice to meet you. And then his first question, are you particularly good at crosswords? And I thought, wow, that's a really interesting question to get. And I'm like, I don't know, I'm good at it. I mean, I don't compete in crosswords or something. I don't know if I'm good or not. He's like, do you use pencil or pen? I'm like, pen. He's like, you're probably good, right? I'm like, okay, that's a heuristic, just a mental shortcut, but that's fine. And I'm like, so why Professor Brady? I never called him Professor Brady after that. It was Mike, curious why? He said, well, the Miller Analogies test, I didn't have to take the GRE. I had to take the MAT, Miller Analogies test. He said, you did pretty good. I'm like, really? How good? Well, 98th percentile in the top 2%. And we see that sometimes. Well, to me, autism is all about language processing. It's really all about the words and their meaning. So it doesn't come as a surprise. So I guess I've got that going for me. Right. Yeah, I guess that was all I was going to say on that. So I like this question. I love this question, right? Ask me anything, don't worry. What's it like being autistic, John, right? And when people get excited, what's it like, right? I'm like, good, they're curious. They want to know. I want that. Imagine you're a little robot or a cyborg, okay? And you're running around with all the other little cyborgs, and you're using the same words, but the way they're strung together is just totally bizarre, right? It just doesn't make sense. They're using these weird constructs called cliches and euphemisms and sarcasm, right? It's like they're saying the opposite of what they really mean. It just doesn't make any sense. You quickly realize your operating system as a cyborg is totally different from everyone else's. That's what it's like. to the degree that when I've been in a few research studies as a participant for autistic adults, and one of the other guys said, I run scripts. And I was like, oh my God, I run scripts too. And the women running it are like, wait, guys, what do you mean you run scripts? And so I'm like, you go first. So he said, well, I don't know what to say. It doesn't come to us intuitively. So I've always got these different scripts in my head. And maybe I've got to pull one down. Maybe I got to come up with a new one. And they're like, wow. And then he said, what about you, John? And I said, here's how I explain it. Do you remember the first Terminator movie? Okay? And there's this scene where there's a guy knocking on the door, and you see the point of view of the Terminator, right? You see it's like a heads-up display, and there's all this data going on, and there's a bunch of different potential responses. Yes, no, go away, you, you. I can't say it, being recorded, right? You know? And I was like, oh my God, that's like me, right? I'm like a cyborg. And a third guy in the study is like, oh my God, John, that's exactly right. I remember that scene. That is so spot on. So you never know when you might run into a cyborg. So this was me. I was made up by a wonderful artiste. My ending slide has a photo of both she and I. She did a great job. I love the arm. This was many years before my diagnosis. It seems a little bit beyond coincidence to me at this point. Okay, so what's it all about, Alfie? So it's language processing, as I said. It's really trying to predict. I feel like I'm my own large language model. I'm always trying to predict language. What are they saying? What are they trying to say? I don't believe it's a disorder of communication. Okay? We're communicating. You're laughing. I can tell I'm reaching you. I'm responding to it. You know, I said, I think that we've got some good neurodiversity here. I got a response back. You're doing a lot of what's called paraverbal, right? Verbal, you know, right? I speak, you hear, right? Nonverbal, you get it. Paraverbal, so laughter, guttural stuff, snorts of derision, as they say, right? So you're doing that, we're communicating, right? Words don't matter as much in communication, and so we get really screwed up by, wait, it doesn't make sense what they're saying. And I absolutely take things literally. Literally. I was talking to a couple of the vendors, really fun, really friendly. One of the guys said, hey, John, when you talk, break a leg. And I was like, yeah, I don't really want to break a leg, right? You know, and I know the phrase, I understood it, you know, but my brain is still doing that translation because my brain is wired to hear the words literally. Like if someone says, oh, John, my brain literally exploded. Yeah, I'm not seeing that. I mean, there was a guy in Maine who took a firework and he put it on his head and he said, watch this. His brain literally exploded, okay? That's a true story, I'm really sad to say. I didn't know the guy. A little alcohol was involved. Predictability. So you hear a lot that it's about repetition. I think it's more, it's a nuance to it, but I think it's much more about predictability than it is repetition. The repetition, the purpose, and the affinity for it is it's easy to predict what's Don't let me lose in a China store, I swear, right? Not always that coordinated. That can be common amongst autistics too, right? So, but the predictability of it, and we'll talk more about that. Logic, absolutely. 10th grade geometry, logical math proofs, if this, then that, I absolutely did fantastic. Made total sense to me. I was having a fun chat with a buddy right before he went in for open heart surgery, actually. See, oversharing, really common. He survived. He crashed twice, but he survived. Quite a miracle. And we were chatting, having a fun chat, talking about my autism, talking about movies and such. And he said, John, you know who you remind me of? And I'm like, no, tell me, Rich, who do I remind you of? He said, you remind me of Mr. Spock. And I was like, awesome, I grok Spock, right? So identified with Spock. I mean, Kirk and I share the same initials, JTK, but I don't have the cool middle name that Kirk had, Tiberius, right? Just so jealous about that. But Spock, absolutely get it. I was telling a friend who is a special needs advocate for kids, right? So she works with a lot of kids who have all sorts of diagnoses, including autism. And she's like, John, I'm so excited. I got to ask you, did you have hyperlexia? And I said, oh my God, what's hyperlexia? And she said, okay, it's reading non-traditional materials way above your level. So like instead of reading stories, maybe you were reading textbooks or something like that at a young age. And I said, well, as a tween, I read an entire set of encyclopedias. And she's like, yep, absolutely. Like I read them A to Z. I work for a Canadian firm. So, so we got to say Z. And we got to put a U in color and behavior and mold and blah, blah. Anyway, we don't have to. So then she said, but it's also, and I'm going to show you a picture in a second, it's also this fascination with letters and numbers to an extent. And I said, in 7th grade, art teacher said, paint something you love. Paint something that makes you happy. This is a reproduction I did just for you all so you could see what I painted. It's not paint, it's colored pencils in 7th grade. That was what I love. That's what made me happy. It's the alphabet, using the spectrum, because I love prisms and I love rainbows and all of that. And I probably loved cupcakes, and if someone had a vanilla cupcake with pink frosting, that would be just totally awesome right now. So I've gotten this question as well. John, because people just, they don't know. They have an initial concept, which we're going to get to in a second. Are you a savant at everything? My first thought is, oh my God, what the heck is the definition of a savant? Everyone thinks they know, but I'm not sure. See if you remember this. Can't do it. I'm looking down. 82, 82, 82. Anyone know what that's from? Rain Man, yeah, absolutely. What's he counting? Toothpicks, but he's not counting. He's doing what's called subitizing. So if I had toothpicks or matchsticks, it's based on an actual event with twin savant boys, men. And so in this scene, Raymond really wants, he's autistic, right? He's played by Dustin Hoffman. His brother, Charlie, is played by Tom Cruise, and Ray really wants toothpicks badly, and so the waitress gets some and she fumbles them and she spills all of the toothpicks on the floor. And Ray looks and he goes, 82, 82, 82. And Charlie says, yeah, there's a lot more than 82, Ray. And he says, 246 total. And Tom Cruise's character turns to the waitress and says, how many in the box? And she looks at the box, which she assumes to be empty, and she says, it says 250 toothpicks. And Charlie says to Ray, pretty close. And they're walking away, and the waitress opens the thought to be empty box and says, oh wait, there's 4 left in the box. Well, 82, 82, 82, 82 is divisible into, right? Into 246. So subitizing is just recognizing how many, like that, like without counting, without adding, without doing anything like that. Most people, including me, once we get above 4, once you hit 5 and above, forget it. We get very inaccurate, we can't subitize, we start counting or adding, we look down and we go 3, 4, 7, right? But that's not subitizing, that's dividing it up. But imagine that you have a threshold, and that threshold is set exponentially higher for some savants. So I can't do that. Prodigious memory is another one. I know a lot of trivia. I don't consider myself to be like a trivia savant, but it's things like in college, there was a trivia contest I was in, and the guy running it is asking the question. You can buzz in anytime, and he says, on a bar of Dial soap, and everyone's like, what? And he turns and he goes, yes? And I say, 8 o'clock. And he goes, that's correct. And everyone's like, what the, wait, how did he even know that? And for me, it's like, there's only one question that anyone could ask about Dial soap. What time is displayed on the bar, right? So it's like so easy for me to answer. But again, I don't consider myself a savant. I've been told I'm pretty good with data. Again, I don't consider it a savant. And for those that know me, stories come easy to me. But again, I don't think I'm a story savant. So the answer is no. But usually people want it to be yes. So if they say, I really think you're a savant, I'm like, hey, thanks. Okay. So, that's cool, I guess. Is there anything I can do with that? Anyway, so my one big thing, any idea yet? My one big thing, we'll wait till the end. I'll drop some more hints. They're Easter eggs. They're not really Easter eggs in case you're like me, you take things literal, but Easter eggs are these cool hints, like references to things, right? Maybe I'm over-explaining, right? All right, autistic habits and traits. And these vary somewhat, but I'll talk about myself as an example. So the first thing is masking. So I'm doing a lot, I'm always masking. Not technically always, but almost always. If I'm with other people, I'm trying to mask. So what is masking? Masking is trying to do what we think is the socially normative, socially acceptable behavior. We're trying to fit in, we're trying to be like everyone else, right? One of us, right? Oh, good, I got laughter on that one. Thank you so much, yeah. So masking, we're always doing it. It takes a tremendous amount of mental energy, right? Our brains, if you attended the talk on neuroscience, Bonnie's talk, which was excellent. Bonnie did a fantastic job yesterday with that. Our brains need glucose, need sugar, to work, right? Our brains are energy hogs. They're 2% of our body weight, but they consume 20% of our fuel, right? And so our brains, as autistics, are always trying to figure out what to do, how to fit in, what to say, what means. For me not to be masking, Ryan, ask me any question, don't worry about it. Why do you want to know that? What's that going to do for you? How is that relevant? Right, so that's like not masking. It's like, what in the world? And it didn't even matter what he asked. I know no one could hear what he said. It literally didn't matter, but thank you so much, Ryan. I appreciate it. Right, and so, yeah, that's good. For the record, it's orange, by the way. Not just orange, but the orange as the sun is rising across the street from my old house in Maine, coming through the maple tree in the fall when the foliage is bright orange and it looks like the tree is ablaze. And when I tell people that, they're like, yeah, that's a lot of detail, John. I'm like, well, yes, right? Didn't you want to know all the details? And so there's this wonderful quote from Mr. Robot. How do you remove a mask when it stops being a mask? I got it from another autistic who wrote a lovely article about learning that she was autistic, right? So it's very hard to take off the mask. Stimming, so stimming, we're doing a lot of coping mechanisms. So stimming, maybe you've seen some autistics who need a lot of support and they might be flapping their arms or doing something physical. Somewhere down here, I have a fidget spinner. I don't really use those. Lately, I've had one of those really long pens that are kind of a novelty pen, and I'll be talking on a Zoom call or whatever, and the pen is just like going everywhere. It's like, John, are you like, are you the maestro of your own orchestra? Because I can't even hear the music, man. I don't know what you're doing, right? But this is cool. It's like all over the place. Usually what I do is this. So all I'm doing is very, very gently tugging on the hairs on my right forearm. And if I'm doing it, if I'm truly stimming, I don't even notice it. It's subconscious. But it helps with coping. So much sensory input going on. Usually I find myself doing that, doing group virtual calls. There's way too much sensory input. Repetition, I already talked about that. It's really predictability. And then blurting. I'm a blurter, apparently, like Paul Paul Blart. So I was in, you're getting these, I love it. I was in a very first lab design meeting, new PI, wanted to impress her. The architect is there, the engineer, my counterpart on the facility side, I worked for the College of Engineering, and I didn't have to be attentive unless they were talking safety. They were talking benches and accessing. She just had like a bunch of powders, not even chemicals. So I was like, I don't care, I'm just typing away. And they're talking about accessing powders and the powders, and all of a sudden, bang. And I was like, oh shit. Oh my God, I'm so sorry, right? I said that. And the architect is like, no, John, when the safety guy says, oh shit, we will stop the meeting. What is wrong? And he and I knew each other, and I was like, so sorry, Larry. And I turned and I'm looking at the PI, a very, very nice person, and she's just smiling at me, you know, she's being so nice. I'm like, Heather, are any of your powders combustible dusts? And I distinctly remember hearing the architect go, oh shit, is that possible? And I'm like, I'm pretty sure one of them is, and the PI's like, I don't know, which, you know, it happens. I'm like, hang on, let me check. I check. It was acetaminophen. It was, right? I'm like, one is, and he's like, that's all we need to know. It's a different design. John, anytime you want to say, oh shit, please go for it, right? So, you know, this stuff works. Small talk is, in that research study, the prompt the researchers gave us was, small talk is, and the guy who said, I run scripts, he filled in the rest of that, a form of torture. And he laughed, we laughed, everyone, and it can be, and people who know me would go, you do really well with small talk, John. I'm like, yeah, you know, I've gotten used to it. My dad was a salesman, my brother was a salesman, my uncle was a salesman, my grandparents on one side were salespeople. So I got used to that sort of stuff, but still sometimes I get lost, I get tired, it's way too much, I have no idea what to say or whatever. So yeah, it can be seemingly torturous. Autistic meltdowns and burnout. So autistic meltdowns and burnout, what are those? I'm not huge fans of these specific terms because they come with too many other definitions and baggage, but that's fine. Meltdowns are coping mechanisms, and burnout is exhaustion. That's really what it is. I've got a story for it, but I have a feeling I need to pick up my pace. How might it affect one's work? So I think a lot of you are probably curious about that, right? So what might you notice? Any useful examples? Yes. So for instance, years and years ago, I was at my office, the dean's office, where I didn't go very often because my building was across campus, which was so nice. And my first boss's admin said, hey, John, you have the very last university-owned phone in our college. And my first thought was, that's not true. But I didn't say anything, right? I didn't want to challenge her on it, but I knew that was factually incorrect. That was my thought. This is factually incorrect, right? Very technical. But I'm like, okay, where's this going, right? And she said, so you have to turn yours in. Why? Well, because you have the last one. Yeah, there's no logic to that, right? So, but why? And what she didn't know, I was amongst the working poor. I was giving most of my salary back to my wife to take care of herself and our son with profound special needs, right? So I was literally not making enough money to survive. So the idea of buying my own phone and plan was, this is not going to work. So again, I think a third time, I said, why? And I probably said it like I was talking to you, right? Like no mask, right? And this was her response. John, you are not special. And I thought, did I say I was special? I don't recall. I didn't say anything. It's so hard to know how to respond to that. So anyway, I've been yelled at since that time too. It's always very odd. Just a quick check-in. How many of you have ever been frustrated by a coworker? Go ahead and raise your hands. Okay, you can put your hands down. Thank you. How many of you that have been frustrated by a coworker have actually yelled at them? Oh, a few have. Okay, interesting. Okay, very interesting. What we've got here is failure to communicate. Some people know the line, right? You're catching on to my one big thing, I'm pretty sure, right? And so this is how we get this idea that it is a disorder of communication. But you may see having the same food every day, wearing the same clothes every day, going to the same things every day, doing, just a lot of that repetitious, because it's predictable, because it's comforting, because we know what the heck is going on, etc. Those are sorts of things. Maybe not conforming to social norms, social cues, not understanding when things are supposed to be a certain way, and all of those sorts of things, okay? Which I think I'm perceiving a little bit, that's sarcasm in case you weren't sure, right? A little bit that a lot of you already understand a lot of these things, all right? So tips, strategies, do's, don'ts for all of us. Remember the double empathy problem, both directions. NTs, neurotypicals, NDs, neurodivergence, okay? This quote, John, this is the one. So I was in my office at UC Davis, and pre-pandemic, and one of the lovely women from purchasing came down to help me with a purchase. And I was on the phone. I'm like, come in, 1 second. And I went like that. And she turned around. She had stepped in my office. She turned around, and there's sayings all over my wall, like big print, right? Stuff like, control your destiny or someone else will, Jack Welch. Flexibility is so important, it deserves a seat at the table, Carolyn Hacks. Moderation in everything, including moderation, Oscar Wilde. I wanted to put Olivia Wilde and see if anyone noticed, right? So I got off the call, I'm like, hey, I'm so sorry. She's like, no, I got to read your quotes, any you like. She's like, this one right here. I'm like, oh yeah, that's a good one. What is it about it? John, if everyone did it, the world would be a happier place. I'm like, oh yeah, absolutely. We did the purchase, she left, I never saw her again because of the pandemic, and then I left UC Davis to go back to Arizona. But every time I think of you, it always turns out good. Every time I think of her, that's another clue, not so subtle, I think. Every time I think of her, I think of this quote. Acceptance is a gift we give ourselves. That's tip number one. Tip number two, how many have ever heard of the columnist from way back, Irma Bombeck? Yeah, a few. Yeah. So she was a columnist. She was very funny. She wrote a book, If Life is a Bowl of Cherries, Why Am I Always in the Pits? Right? It's a great pun. Love puns. Got my love of puns from my mom. And her advice was this: children need our love the most when they deserve it the least. Right, that opposite effect, which is another rhetorical device, and she's a writer. I've taken that and I've tweaked it, and I use it in the communication workshops that I teach. People need our empathy the most when they might seem to deserve it the least. So that's my tip number two. If all you do is increase your acceptance of others and your empathy, you'll be all set. Seriously. Okay, genetics, yeah, have I got any? I think so, I hope so. So I was diagnosed and I told my sister, told my brother, told my sister, I said, Les, so do you think our dad was autistic? And without hesitation, oh my God, John, knowing your diagnosis, Dad definitely was. He was so eccentric, right? That's what we called him, eccentric. And Granddad may have been as well. She's my older sister. I didn't know our granddad. Many parents now discover that they are autistic when their kid gets diagnosed. So I was with a couple of colleagues. One was younger and one was closer to my age. And she mentioned, we were having lunch, and casual, and she said, oh, hey, by the way, my 17-year-old daughter just got diagnosed as being autistic. And then she said, and after a few visits, her autism counselor looked at me and said, so let's talk about some of your traits, as a matter of fact. And so she was, and I'm like, that's so cool. So then I told him about my diagnosis, because there was context and opening, stuff I learned. If there's context, go ahead, it's okay to share, all of that sort of stuff. Oh, really? I didn't know that. That's how that's supposed to work? Okay, thanks. Is that a rule? Is that written anywhere or anything like that? Apparently not. So, and then we're talking about how deep people can go, because I've been told, John, no one goes as deep as you do. No one looks at data the way you do. Oh my God. And she said, absolutely. And she's a PI. She does research. She's like, absolutely, very, very deep. And then she lays this line on me. The world needs ditch diggers too, Danny. Do you know that line? What's it from? Caddyshack, right? Anyway, okay, don't get me started on that one. 100,000 years ago, according to anthropologists, scientists, geneticists, and others in psychology, etc., something changed. And so our little clans and tribes started to realize that it was actually important to incorporate people who had very different skills, abilities, ways that maybe didn't fit in, because previous to that, if you didn't fit in, you were a threat. Outrage is a survival tool. So let's say we're living in a cave and I start dancing around and attracting saber-toothed tigers. Is it saber-toothed tigers or saber-teethed tigers? I'm not sure. So, but if I do, you're gonna say, that's wrong, you're gone, right? I'm getting eaten, and then my genes are not being passed on. They're being passed through the tiger, but that's about it. It's not benefiting anyone except the tiger, right? So here is a quote in an article by a researcher. All human evolution was driven by slightly autistic Asperger's and autistic people. The human race would still be sitting around in caves, chattering to each other if it were not for them. And oops, it was written by Professor Dr. Michael Fitzgerald, first professor of child and adolescent psychiatry in Ireland. It's from '06, thus the reference to Asperger's. Now the woman who also it's not my phone, man. Also a researcher. I know social norms enough. My phone's on mute, said, I'm not sure I would go quite as far as Dr. Fitzgerald, but he's absolutely right. So maybe you're curious, other creatives. I was so fascinated by this. I've grouped them because, of course, if you're autistic, you can't have a huge list. You have to systematize this. You have to do things in groups. You have to sort them. So here we go, really quick. Scientists, actors, writers, artists, musicians, game players, inventors, politician, and portrayals. And I've talked about Rain Man. How many know Drax from Guardians of the Galaxy? Yeah, right. Peter Quill goes, and Drax goes, why would I draw my finger across my neck? Right? His whole race doesn't get sarcasm, right? And there's this great article written by like a teenager maybe, and he took his kid brother to see Guardians of the Galaxy. And his kid brother's autistic. And when he saw Drax, his brother was like, oh my God, he's like me. He doesn't understand sarcasm. He's autistic too. So there's this whole big thing online about how wonderful Drax is. It's such a great thing to have a superhero who is autistic, whether it's acknowledged or not, right? And oh my God, look at this. It's Drax in the flesh, huh? Again, way before my diagnosis. This time the painting was done by my brother. My son. That was a weird slip. Anyway, we're almost done. Paradoxes. So seemingly opposites. Stories. So I wasn't a big story reader. As a matter of fact, I fell behind. I had to be tricked by a friend of the family who was a teacher into accelerating my reading of stories just so I would keep up. But I was hyperlexic and I did a lot of reading. So now some know me as the story guy, right? I do research on story as part of my PhD. So I asked my committee member, who's a qualitative researcher, I'm like, Sonia, how is this possible? She said, John, you figured out at an early age that stories are the most effective means of communication, and they pack more detail and context and subtext and everything into it. So that made sense to me. Communication, again, we've talked about this. I now teach communication as a workshop for a sister organization, AIHA, American Industrial Hygiene Association. And again, it seems kind of odd, but it doesn't. You know, it takes someone who doesn't understand it real well to study it to the nth degree, right? Like the list, the list of references in the back of the workbook I wrote for them is 10 pages long. And it's sorted, of course, by chapter. Predictability, love predictability, but also love change. So I am very much, where are you on the spectrum of food adventurous? Right, so this is, I am only eating crackers and peanut butter, and this is Andrew Zimmern from Bizarre Foods, right? I'm close to Andrew. I'm not that far, but I'm really close, so I'll try anything. I've had chicken feet, boiled chicken feet. They're kind of tasteless, right? They ought to be fried. Anyway, but at home, same thing, day after day. I mean, healthy foods, sorry, not healthy. People are healthy, foods are nutritious. That's sort of like, fish are our friends. Love it. Talking, people who know me, John's kind of good at talking. He can go on for a while, right? But also, I like to follow what I call my, and I've had this for ages, like decades, my Mr. Ed principle of talking. How many know the reference to Mr. Ed? He was a talking horse in the 60s. It was a sitcom. He doesn't really talk. They stuck peanut butter inside. Anyway, love the backstory, right? And so the third verse in the theme song, back when they had theme songs and they had lyrics and they told you everything going on, and it was, see if I can do it. People yakety yak a streak and waste their time of day, but Mr. Ed will never speak unless he has something to say. So, I don't yakety yak a streak and waste your time of day. I'll never speak unless I have something to say. But boy, when I got something to say, man, I'm talking up a storm, let me tell you. Deciding nutritious sort of foods, health benefits, I'm done. You tell me you're a scientist, I'm right there, right? Hey, John, there's anti-inflammatory properties in coffee when you pour in a little milk. Oh, okay, I've had it black for decades, now I'm having it with milk, right? But if you try to tell me that lagging indicators and compliance are a great way to keep people safe, yeah, I'm not so much with you on that one. We're going to have some conversations. I'm going to come back to abbreviations and acronyms, empathy. So let me tell you a very quick story. I was walking with a colleague years and years ago. We were going to like a meeting, an organizational meeting, and going through this downtown area, and there's different groups of people hanging out. And we go at a huge buffet, we eat, lots of good food. We're the last to leave. And then she asked, as the waitstaff are packing up, hey, is there anything we can take? You know, I know you can't give us a lot of the food. And they're like, you can have the rolls. We can give out the rolls. And she's like, great. How many? And they're like, we'll give you all of the rolls, because otherwise we're throwing them out. So they gives her a bag, like this huge bag, and she's walking, and I'm like, okay, this is cool. She's gonna put like all these rolls in the freezer or something, right? And we're walking back through town, and we get to one of these groups of people hanging out. They weren't hanging out, they were homeless. She had realized that. She goes right up to them, here you go, I brought you a bunch of rolls, they're fresh. And they were so happy, and she was like, hey, enjoy. And we kept going, and I'm like, awesome, way to go, very, very nice. Go two researchers, Goldman and Ekman. Sorry, did you say Coleman or Goldman? That's a really obscure line, but maybe you know it. Said there's three parts to empathy. Cognitive, I understand. Affective or emotional, I feel your pain. And then compassionate, which is I'm going to do something about it. She demonstrated all three. She's autistic. So don't hand me the myth, yes, and I'll explain any of these weird references, that people who are autistic don't get empathy. We feel things very deeply. We just don't display them outward. Abbreviations, I hate abbreviations. I loathe the bus. I loathe abbreviations, right? So I loathe them so much, I wrote a book of them to keep track. And it was published by the ACGIH, American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists. But it's like people on Slack in my old company were like, he's the GOAT, he's the GOAT. And I'm like, why is he a goat? That's not good. Is somebody scapegoating someone? No, John, he's the greatest of all time. I'm like, oh, never heard of that. And then, oh yeah, golf, yeah, this, whatever, FTW. And I'm like, oh my God, what the heck? What is FTW? For the win. What does that even mean, for the win, right? Okay, so any final thoughts? Yes. So in case you see it, hashtag actually autistic. I am actually autistic. There's a lot represented by that, but the biggest thing that I want to share with you is that line. Nothing about us without us. You want to write policy, you want to do training, you want to do awareness, you want to make things better. Great, thank you very much. How do you want me to be involved? Because you're not going to do it without me or without someone who is autistic, because this is so different. I'm sorry, but you're going to screw it up, right? And my first rule to engineering students when I would teach safety, no matter how bad something is, it can always be worse. So don't make it worse. Right, exactly. Cool. So I will take any and all questions now, please. Yes. Do we have a mic? Do we have a mic or not? How are we going to do this? So there's all sorts of questions here. Thank you. Oh, David. Thank you so much, David. That's about a little applause for our AV guy, David. Yeah. Cool. Thank you, Ryan. He'll come back to you. You just need to, Ryan, you want...
Hello. Oh, okay. There we go.
Once you're,
Sorry.
Ryan.
Where was the question? Sorry.
And then go forward, Ryan. She has one in the towards the front. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Nancy.
Hi, Nancy.
I work at Harvard, and we have a big
Harvard?
push. Harvard.
Harvard. I'm from here.
We have a big push lately for accessibility
Okay.
in our online course development. And I know what that means in terms of like visual impairment and hearing impaired people. But I've been thinking a lot lately about how do we make it more accessible for
Yeah.
a neurodiverse population.
Yep.
So I don't know if you might have any thoughts on what we should be thinking about.
That's a great question. My very first thought was, you probably already looked at this, and maybe they have stuff on it, I haven't checked, but Universal Design for Learning, UDL, by CAST, C-A-S-T, so you can just search for that. But in general, it's a lot of I fled the room. I went to our quiet room. It was so overwhelming to me. So it's that sort of thing. And I don't mind sharing the personal experience that I've experienced that. I know other autistics who have experienced that. And so I would say, and maybe consult, maybe have a team where you have good representation, and maybe those people can help you as well. That's a good start. Feel free to send me an email, and I can follow up with more resources. Next, please.
So many of us work in higher ed, various institutions, and we all get the emails of, it's this month for this group, this month for this interest. Sometimes it's 4 different interests in a month, and you start to wonder if being the month of something actually has meaning anymore.
Speak right
Oh,
into the
sorry.
mic, please. It's okay. I can hear you, but the rest might not.
Okay, but I've noticed that like the new thing seems to be, how do we get our institutions ready for the neurodiverse? And the way it's being framed, it's like neurodiverse students are this new cohort to think about. It's like, have they realized that the neurodiverse employees were already there?
Yeah, exactly.
But like, I read these emails and I can't help but go, you know, the neurodiverse students already been going through and now we work at you. And historically,
Yeah,
the colleges and universities are full of the neurodiverse. And
I'm with you. Yeah, tell them I said nothing about us without us. It's pretty clear that they don't have a lot of neurodiversity represented in figuring this out, because otherwise they would have said, we probably have a lot of neurodiversity already, and we just don't know it, right? Because not everyone, you're not going to wear it on your shirt sleeve, as that cliche goes, if I understand the cliche right.
well, it almost seems like they don't realize that the neurodiverse end up in the workforce.
Right,
Like,
yeah.
like that we're somehow, well, we
Yeah.
go through school and then just disappear.
Yeah, and I was an employee at a couple of universities, and I was staff and treated well, but in the hierarchy, staff is down here, so I think we're ignored a lot. There could be really good resources about that. There really must be. I'm just not familiar and on top of it the way I could be. So again, feel free to reach out to me, please. Yeah, thank you. It is a good question. It is a valid concern. Hey, yep. Hey.
First, thank you for sharing.
Sorry?
Thank you for sharing, because it's
You're-
very strong of you to share your experience.
Thank you so much.
My question is, and maybe hopefully I'm right, is your thing movies?
Oh, my thing. So thank you for asking.
Or movie
Right.
quotes.
Right. So it's pop culture references, mostly from the 60s and 70s. My movie references go into the 80s, thus Caddyshack, of course. I mean, it was awesome, right? So I've
Terminator.
got that going for me. That's Bill Murray's character, Carl, the landscaper guy, right? But it's also musical references, and you heard at least one. So I don't know lyrics more than anyone else. I probably know them less based on the karaoke last night. Everyone knew so many lyrics. I was so impressed. Besides those reading it off the screen. I mean, I get that, right? I did it. But a single word or phrase will trigger in my head a song, right? Someone in Ryan's talk today said, or I said, smiling faces, right? And I was like, oh, smiling faces show no traces of the evil that lurks within. Can you dig it? It's a great song. Motown, love that stuff. So it's like always going through my head. It's not earworms. So it is pop culture references, and it's making the connections between different things. Like, you know the 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon? Yeah, so like I was doing that way before that became popular, and not just with Kevin Bacon. And if you're not familiar with that, it's like this person is in this movie, and then this movie. It's like Harrison Ford was in American Graffiti with Cindy Williams, and then they were in The Conversation with Gene Hackman, and Gene Hackman did a cameo in Young Frankenstein, and Terry Garr was in Young Frankenstein, and she was with Michael Keaton in Mr. Mom, and like I can go on forever, right? So there you go. Thank you for asking. Oh, by the way, Miller Analogies test, you ready? So that's like this. Guinea pig is to capybara as grape is to strawberry, apple, orange, or watermelon. How many say strawberry? Apple? You're not voting. So it's apple, because grapes and apples both have skins that you eat, but seeds that you don't. But here's what it feels like to take the MAT. You ready? This is a great one. You can ask me later. Battleship is to fruit salad. Already you're lost, right? Good. As platypus is to Jupiter, harmonica, Krakatoa, or Julie. There you go. That's exactly what it felt like coming out of the MAT. Anyway, here is me once more with the artist who did the makeup for me, and I love what she did with my left eye. It was awesome. She did a great job.
Hey, Jonathan, we got
I-
one more over here.
I'm blinded by the light. Ooh, song reference, right? Sung by Chris Thompson of Manfred Mann, written by Springsteen. Go ahead. I can't see you, but just go ahead.
All right, very good. That I'm always curious because you opened my eyes as far as different ways of thinking.
Yep.
I was wondering as far as do you think like in colors when you're thinking? Do you think in colors? Because I know that might be some of the characteristics.
Synesthesia? And are you Zeke? You sound
it is.
like Zeke.
I am Zeke.
I can't tell. You're like, this is like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, man, right? I mean, I think you're an alien right now, Zeke, or something like that. I think I'm an alien, but I'm a cyborg apparently. So I do think that I think at times with colors, I've never been assessed for synesthesia, which always sounds like you're sneezing or something like that, right? But I think synesthesia is cool. That's experiencing senses in ways that you normally wouldn't, like I smell colors or something like that, or I see dead people or something. Just had to throw another one in. Anyway, thank you all so very much.